Greetings, traveler. Today, we're going to talk about top-down design versus bottom-up design. So what that means is whether you start with most of the game already kind of in your mind and you're just breaking down into components, or whether you're starting out with just a very simple concept, a very small prototype, and you're building it out as it goes. So today, the question that we're going to answer is which one is right for your game and what's the advantages and disadvantages of each one. So after I break down both approaches, I'm going to give out my recommendation. As an example today, we're going to use Star Wars Jedi Survivor. You don't need to know anything specifically about this game, but just as a visual example to sort of illustrate what elements of the game we're talking about and what kind of mechanics will be working towards. If you don't know who I am, my name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 14 years now. I've worked in places like, well, Electronic Arts, like this game, although not at the moment. I've worked at Tri-Ace, Cygames. I've worked on FIFA, Idolmaster, Star Ocean, and lots of other perhaps lesser known games. But something that always piqued my interest when it comes to deciding what sort of approach to take with a game was whether we want to approach it in a bottom-up sort of way or in a top-down sort of way. So first of all, what do these things mean and why is it important to decide the approach? Well, deciding the approach sort of lays the path with the steps we need to take from that point onwards. So if we decide to go with one or the other approach, then we sort of already know what steps we need to take in order to take the game from just a concept or just an idea all the way to its completed version. And knowing which one we'll go with from the beginning just makes that process all the more easy. So let's define what each one means actually. So let's say we're trying to make a game like this one. So to briefly talk about this game, similar to many action games, you have a character who can move around. Again, if you don't know anything specific about this game, don't worry about it. We'll cover all the basics here. And what you can do basically is you have a lightsaber. You can attack like this in an action way. Every time you click the button, your character does one step of this attack. And there's the defense mode, and there's a couple of other stances with the lightsaber offering different offensive and defensive bonuses. Also, you have movement in the environment. You can run and dash and do these jumps, climb things. There's these ladder-like structures to climb on. And you can also use the force. You can do this motion to push enemies back. Now there's nobody, so you don't see anything. You can do this motion to pull enemies towards you, but also manipulate the elements in the environment. Finally, you can meditate in spots like this, and this helps you either recover or spend the skill points you gain through experience through these menus here to gain new abilities or improve the existing ones. Again, the specifics of all these abilities are not important for today's video, but I just wanted to show it to you to give you a general idea of what this particular game involves. So if we were to go about making a game like this, what would it look like going with a top-down approach, and what would it look like with the bottom-up approach? So in the top-down approach, typically you can think of it as you have a rather clear idea of all the things you want to include in this particular game. So all you need to do is make a list of all the features, all the abilities, all the powers, all the movements, all the items you want to have in the game, lay them all out, and then simply go about implementing each one of them in the game, and then making sure that all these things fit well together. So in practice, how that would look like for this particular game, and I'm not saying that that's how the creators did it, this is just one way to approach it, is If we know, for example, that we want a 3-step combo attack for the player character, then we would say that the first one is, for example, a horizontal slash, and the second is a vertical slash, and the third is a diagonal slash, for example. So then in the game design document, we would make sections for each of these things, and would say that first of all, there's a player character. The player character has attack capabilities and movement capabilities and perhaps power, force capabilities and items. So we would make a section for these, and in the section for the attacks, we would say the character has a 3-step combo attack when it comes to his standard lightsaber. And I say standard lightsaber because in this particular game you can change your stances. I don't want to spoil too much about the game, but basically different stances give you different options with your attack combos. So after you go and for the basic attack, you say there's these 3 steps in the attack, and you outline it in the document, and you describe how each step is different from the others. Then all you need to do is eventually hand it off to the engineers once it's described in enough detail, and to the artists and so on, and they can go ahead and create this 3-step combo, or however many steps you want to create. And then you just need to make sure that the in-game movement matches what you had in mind when you were creating it on paper, essentially. So you do the same for all the remaining aspects of the game. So the movement, so here we have the typical running animation, but there's also a dash. So in the game design document, you would say there is, when the character moves around, the default motion is this light run, I suppose, and it typically generates a X kilometer per hour or X mile per hour run. But if you hold down shift, then perhaps the movement doubles. So again, this is what it says on the document. So when you hand it off to your team, or when you implement it yourself, if you're doing the implementation yourself, then you would just need to make sure that the reality in the game, the implemented feature in the game, matches the description in the document. And that's just a starting point, of course, because you will always need to do small adjustments here and there once all the elements are inside the game. So that's the gist of the top-down approach. You create a huge list, or a smaller list if it's a smaller game, of all the possible things the character can do in the game, all the characters there are in the game, all the levels and all the items and so on. And then you simply go about implementing them. So what's the difference with the bottom-up approach? So imagine we wanted to end up with some sort of an action game like this one, but we have no idea in the beginning all the things we would like to have in the game. Since it's an action game, it's very likely that it will have some sort of attacks, but is it going to be melee attacks? Is it going to be ranged? Is it going to be magic? Can you throw things? Can you throw enemies? Can you modify your weapons? These are all good questions that we often ask ourselves during game design. But what if you have no idea if it would be fun for this game to have ranged attacks or not? If it would be fun to use magic or not? Because this happens quite often in game development, and because when you start making the game, or a new prototype even, you don't have the answers to all these questions, and you don't want to have them beforehand. You want to sort of develop them as the game goes on. Let the gameplay elements emerge rather than set them out from the beginning. The other approach, which I refer to here as a bottom-up approach, is start with simply a gray box prototype. So if you boot up Unity or Unreal or most engines, you will start with an empty level and a character who is either a box or just a robot-looking or puppet-looking character with no features. And typically all you can do is move around the level. So that is the bottom of your bottom-up approach. So you're starting with just one element, and you're bridging the gap to the top, where you have all the different elements, all the attacks and the magic and the items and all that. So what's the next step then? The next step would be to play around just with that simple single character or single point of motion and see how that feels. If something comes to mind that would make this more fun. So imagine if we had this character, but this wasn't a Star Wars game and it was up to us to make it into whatever we wanted, then perhaps this character, I don't know, with this sort of stance, he looks pretty strong, perhaps holding an axe or two axes would give this character a more barbarian, Viking kind of look, maybe. And instead of a city like this, it could be in the middle of the forest. So if we wanted to go with that approach, then instead of making this single lightsaber weapon, this one weapon, we could have the character hold two sticks to simulate the dual axes, and develop just one or two attack animations and see how that feels. So instead of the city having walls and boxes like that, we would probably need more trees, I suppose, and more asymmetrical ground. So perhaps it would be fun to have some large boxes put inside the ground to simulate the ups and downs of the forest floor, perhaps. And for trees, since it's a gray box prototype, we wouldn't go too crazy. So we would perhaps take some cylinders of varying sizes and spread them around the level to simulate this forest floor sort of situation and the trees, and see what it feels like to have this barbarian looking character with the two axes running through the trees, perhaps hunting animals or fighting, I don't know, skeletons or whatever crazy thing you want to try. So as you do this process, the magic that happens there is that you come up with things and you come up with ideas as you go, sort of. Where, kind of when you're using an AI like ChatGPT or something like that, you don't know beforehand all the things you're going to ask it. First, you ask something like, I don't know, how much iron is there in, I don't know, some food. And then it gives you the answer and you're like, oh, okay, so what about this other food? So the second question that you got, you didn't have in mind from the beginning. You got it. The second question was born after you got the answer to the first question. So this is kind of how this process goes as well. You create your barbarian, you give him the two axes and the attack animation, and you create the tree level. You play around with it a little bit, and then you get the second idea. You think, well, okay, I thought that it might be fun to have skeletons as enemies, so let's make those skeletons. And then you create the skeletons and maybe you like them and you want more monsters in that direction, or you don't like them and you think, they move too slow or they're unrealistic. So perhaps it would be better to have human enemies or animal enemies, or, perhaps this game is more about survival rather than combat. So it's all about, building a hut or a base or something like that. So that constant process of seeing what you have and thinking to yourself, I wonder what would be fun to have next, is what takes you all the way from the bottom of the design to the top. So once you reach that critical mass where you think, this game has a good flow, the action feels fun, it fulfills its role as as this barbarian Viking adventure or sword fighting adventure or whatever you're going for, then perhaps you might think, okay, now I think this game would be ready to test with some other people, or if you've done that already, perhaps it's time to start selling it for whatever amount you think is appropriate. So how do you decide? How do you decide between the top-down approach or the bottom-up approach? So I think that rather in my experience, I have found that if we're working with something that's well known, so think, for example, if you made a game and now it's time to make the continuation to that game. So if you were working on Monster Hunter 1 and now it's time to make Monster Hunter 2, for example, then you already have a basic idea of the elements you definitely have to include in the game. What sort of attack animations, what sort of monsters, what sort of levels, and so on. But you also want to add some new elements. Although this time the new elements are not completely alien. You won't consider suddenly making the game into a dating simulator even when it was an action game to begin with, for example. You will likely want to keep things in the same theme. So there you have more experience with how long things take in the project, specifically in that sort of project because you've already made the first game. And you want to control how long these extra features cost and how long they take to develop. Now, this isn't to say that you must have a very rigid timeline for these things, although having a good general idea of this estimate always helps. So what you would do then is lay down all the elements you want to include in this second game and say, okay, we're going to need these things from the first game plus these few other things that we want to add. A couple of extra weapons, some extra enemies, some extra stages, perhaps a few new powers or abilities. And then you can sit down and implement all those and simply check how all these things interact with each other and make sure that the game is fun and balanced and it works well with itself, basically. That is very useful to do if you have this basis to work off. If you have game 1 or game 1 and game 2 and you're making game 3, that's a useful approach, I think, and it helps to think of it in that way. If you don't have that, or if you're deliberately trying to make something new, you're deliberately trying to make something that doesn't exist out there, I think it's fun to start off with an empty prototype and just experiment, or just have a concept about it. Maybe the theme of the game, the basic actions, maybe the basic weapons, the camera. Perhaps for this game you want isometric camera rather than this third-person camera, or whatever else you want to experiment with. And because you don't know absolutely everything about the game yet, you don't know all the enemies and all the levels and all the final skill trees you will end up having, then in my experience it's more useful, easier to proceed when you have a bottom-up approach and you sort of build it as you go, and you decide when it's time to share it with people and when it's time to start selling it. So there you have it. That's my general method, deciding between these two situations. And here I think there's another little bonus one that I can share that is closer to the top-down approach, but it has a very good amount of elements from the bottom-up approach. So in this kind of game development, I think I have a hunch that a lot of strategy and city building and games like that were developed, where you simply start and you have just a very large list of things you want to do, but not quite everything yet. So let's say you're building a city building simulator and you want to have plots to build buildings and pipes to simulate the water system and electricity cables to simulate the electricity network of the city and the gas pipes and so on. And you build these systems and you're trying to aim for basically a final super interesting situation where you have all these elements to play with. You can choose where to put the electricity lines and the water pipes and the buildings and the fire station and all that. So that is fun to do because developers, we're so into the game that we're making. We have such intimate knowledge that it's difficult for ourselves to challenge ourselves when we know everything about the game. So to explain what I mean, when somebody touches a game for the very first time or plays for the very first time, they don't know anything about the game. So they have a completely different concept of difficulty compared to the developers themselves, who have been working with this game probably for years already. So they have their tunnel vision. They've been in this for years, so they know absolutely everything about the game. So they need a very, very different level of challenge just to keep them motivated and going. While somebody who's playing a game for the first time, even keeping track of the UI can be difficult. So it's a completely different experience and challenge that we're talking about. So how do you proceed with that approach of just creating this super complex experience first? Well, in the city building example, you would go about creating all these systems for the water and electricity and the buildings and so on, and then get to a point where you like what the game feels like in this flourished, very, very dense and complex form, where you have all these elements interacting with each other. If a fire breaks out, you have put a fire station that automatically responds with fire trucks and puts out the fire. You have all this, very, very living simulation kind of experience. So then the question becomes, how do you get from that, which is a super complex experience with basically no tutorial, to an experience that somebody can enjoy right from their first session? So in that case, it would be more of cutting down and introducing things at a slow enough rate where players feel that they understand, the basic mechanics of the game, maybe just the roads and just simple buildings and just simple water networks to make sure people have the basic necessities. And once players seem to understand these features, they hit a population limit or a infrastructure milestone, or they have spent a certain amount of money on the construction of the city and so on, then you can judge that they have a basic competency around this feature, and you can then introduce the next feature and the next goal to make sure that they learn about that. And this way you can guide them all the way to the top of the experience, essentially, where you have a player who knows basically as much as a developer. And when they have that much knowledge about the game, usually they don't need a lot of hand-holding, and they can be let alone in a sandbox sort of situation and build all these grand, majestic cities that we see people make on the internet. So that's a very common strategy, I believe, with city building games, and that same approach could be taken with basically any other game. So you wouldn't quite put down all the features on paper first for a game, but you wouldn't start out with just a gray box prototype either. You would start with a pretty extensive list. So if you wanted to make an action combat game like this one, maybe you would say, okay, we definitely need machine guns, and we definitely need throwing axes, and we definitely need flamethrowers, and put all these crazy ideas down. And here's the difference, right? You don't put all these things together and you stop and you make sure that they all work with each other. Usually the way it happens is you keep adding things to this madness until you get this critical mass of, maybe 60% of the things in the game are working and are fun, and the rest 40% are just things that are not fun or not working very well, or they're so complex they should be their own game instead of being mixed with this game. And then you simply take that as the final level of the game, and you cut down to the first level of the game where the player starts with one character and one weapon and just one thing to do basically, and work their way up. Anyway, that's another bonus approach. Needless to say, this approach is hugely expensive. You don't have any clear end state in mind, and you keep adding things to the game, waiting for the game to reach this critical fun mass before you stop. And of course, all these things you add, they will eventually need to be explained with a tutorial, and game developers traditionally don't like making tutorials. They like making complex features, which I think is a shame, because tutorials, I think, are content in themselves. And after you've come up with a very complex game, simply making the tutorial is kind of like teaching the player how to have fun with a game, which I think is a great endeavor. Anyway, so here's then 2+1 approaches to thinking out and planning a game in advance to make sure that you have the best possible idea of the road that lays ahead and what are your steps to completion. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope this is useful to at least one other person out there. If you have any questions about this, I'll be happy to answer what we can. And as always, have fun.